OK, time now for a look at today's newspapers with Barbara Serra.
Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Andrew Eborn and Christina Patterson. Always great to have you on. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, starting with the Sunday Telegraph, which reports on the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, saying the UK is ready to hit Yemen's Houthis again. The Observer focuses on the economic risks of a widening Middle East conflict. 100 days of hell. The Mirror marks a grim milestone in the war in Gaza, reporting on a premature baby clinging to life. The Sunday Express writes about calls from an MP for post office chiefs to be sacked if found responsible for the Horizon scandal. Now, according to the Sunday Times, Theresa May's government knew about the IT concerns, but still pushed through a CBE for former post office boss Paula Venables. And the Mail on Sunday splashes an exclusive with more details about a man involved in a revolt on a British Airways flight in November. The Sun on Sunday has a story about Lauren Goodman's former relationship with footballer Kyle Walker. And the cold weather is the top story on the Star. They love a weather story. The headline, brace yourself for the big freeze. I should have rolled my arm more. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. Well, as I mentioned, I'm joined by Andrew and Christina again. Thanks so much for being with us. OK, so a lot of the front pages in one way or another focusing on the Middle East. And by that, I don't mean just Gaza, but obviously the way that it's unfolding. Let's start with the Mail, which has an interview with Rishi Sunak, where he effectively, I mean, the headline of the interview is, warns world is facing the most volatile time in years. And he mentions what's happening with the Houthis now, the attacks by the US and the UK, obviously the war in Gaza, and Ukraine, which has a little bit fallen out of the headlines. Christina, what did you make of that interview?
Well, it's very interesting for a number of reasons. Of course, the world, I mean, Sunak is self-evidently right. We are looking at an incredibly unstable geopolitical situation in a way that we haven't done for years, and it is terrifying. But the subtext of this whole interview is, look at me, I'm the great global statesman. And apparently it was only the Mail on Sunday who were invited along for this journey, who make a great song and dance of being the people invited along. And the message that Sunak wants to convey is, oh, Keir Starmer wouldn't be up to this, I'm a proper global person. In fact, Keir Starmer has already been to Ukraine and met Zelensky, and there is every indication that he would have just as much gravitas on the global stage. So it seems a slightly desperate gambit to me. And I understand that this is all about politics for someone who's facing an election this year. But it also seems to me a little bit distasteful to use this stuff as a PR opportunity, because in each of these situations, people are dying. Obviously, tens of thousands, well, 23,000 minimum people have died in Gaza. We don't know how many people have died in Ukraine, but an enormous number, and we suspect that the numbers are being underplayed on both sides. And of course, with the bombing of Houthi targets in Yemen, it's more than likely civilians, innocent civilians, are dying as well. So amidst the PR, there is a Prime Minister who is having to make the decisions that will lead to people dying and will also be arguably endangering the lives of British citizens, because you can't just bomb another country and think everything will be fine. The Houthis have themselves said there will be some form of retaliation. So it's very frightening stuff, but I find it a bit distasteful that it's being used for PR.
What did you make of his interview?
Well, and that's always seen the way, isn't it? It's the old film in, 1997, Wag the Dog, where basically the whole idea of a war, you're distracting people from that sort of attention. The reception that Sunak got in Ukraine is much better than the one he got at home. And you're looking at that sort of international stage. So you're right. And the idea, what they're hoping, is that he will look much more at the international statesperson than
just to play devil's advocate and not necessarily to defend Rishi Sunak, but when he says the world is facing the most volatile time in years, I mean, he's not wrong.
Oh, no,
he's
not
totally
wrong
right.
about that at all. He's
not controversial.
Of course he's not. And that is, I mean, it's a pretty terrifying time for everyone at the moment. And I I don't think either of us are criticising his policies in the light of that, but it's more about very evidently using this for PR.
Yes. The subtext has to be, as a result of that, you want stability and therefore you don't want change in terms of the leadership.
Well, let's look specifically at one of the aspects, and that's the attack on Houthi rebels. If we go to the Sunday Telegraph, on the front page, and this time it's the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, UK ready to strike Houthis again. Andrew, what exactly is he saying here? Because, of course, the most recent strike was just the US.
It's all about defending the freedom of navigation and making sure that you get that sort of protection. And again, it's the language of war. You're sort of turning around and saying, we've carried out these strikes, this is the reason we're doing it. If you don't stop these attacks, we're going to continue. And I think it's trying to be a sort of powerful leader on that sort of basis. Because at the moment, it's having a massive impact, obviously, on the economy and so on and so forth. A lot of the... we're in election years, both in the US and also in the UK, and it's having that massive impact. So it's got to be that rhetoric, is what he's sort of turning around and saying, is that we're prepared to do it again if you carry on in this way.
I mean, Cameron, obviously a foreign secretary who's used to the global stage because of his previous job. So what have you made of what he said in this particular article?
I think, I mean, I'm glad there isn't a complete novice as Foreign Secretary at the moment, although I don't think those of us who don't think Brexit was a great idea wouldn't say that his own contributions to Britain and geopolitics were brilliant. But in some ways, he's just stating a fact that what the Houthis are doing is having a potentially enormous threat to the global economy and the British economy. So I don't think that we are necessarily wrong to try to respond in some way, but the risk is always that there will be some kind of escalation. And the Houthis have shown themselves over years of war with Saudi Arabia, which has absolutely decimated Yemen and caused massive famine and suffering. They have shown themselves to be very resilient, actually, so I don't think they're to be underestimated.
And all of this comes, of course, on the day that marks a grim milestone. So, front page of the Sunday Mirror, Middle East's grim milestone, 100 days of hell. And they have a picture there of a premature baby in an incubator in Gaza, I think at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital. And now Israeli troops are approaching. I mean, 100 days. Lots of reasons behind it. I mean, there's a whole political angle, but obviously the scale of the civilian suffering, I don't think any of us could have predicted 100 days ago. I mean, the question is, we don't know how it's going to end, and arguably Israel is no safer now than it was before.
And it's absolutely horrible, isn't it? And yet more and more of these revolting images coming out on that sort of basis. And they're talking about the power cuts that are threatening the lives of Gaza babies, and exactly one of the very few working medical facilities is now threatened as a result of it, which is why they've got that dramatic picture. But what's going to happen is it's going to galvanise the hatred. The more these images that pollute the media, it's just going to get worse and worse. And I think that's the real tragedy, because you've got to say, look, what is the end game?
I mean, you say pollute the media, but I mean, these images, I guess, need to be.
Oh, no, I agree. We need to, because there is always a risk that you desensitise these sort of issues. And actually, when you remind people of the tragedy that's going on, and this is where these pictures absolutely come into play on that basis.
Because, I mean, 100 days in, there's no real view, Christina, of how it ends and what the solution will be. And actually, there's enormous disagreement between all the parties.
I don't think that Benjamin Netanyahu had a clear strategy. I'm sorry to say this, but I would have thought that the chances of the hostages coming back alive now are probably pretty much lower than they have ever been, because, unfortunately, kind of killing enormous numbers of people is not more likely to make Hamas give back the hostages. And what is also tragic in this situation is that Hamas doesn't seem to care how many innocent Palestinians are killed. That was, in fact, part of their strategy, because they have embedded themselves amongst civilians and used civilians as human shields. So there is no... I mean, this will have to be solved not by Netanyahu, but essentially by, one assumes, America and the Arab states.
But arguably politically rather than militarily.
Absolutely.
Yes,
We don't have a lot of time left, and there's, of course, one domestic story which outweighs all the other ones. A front page of The Observer, and it is plan to reform use of private prosecutions. Tell me more.
Absolutely. Well, this is the biggest miscarriage in British justice of these horrendous stories about these post office submasters and working on that sort of premise, that they were all wrongly accused of various crimes and defrauding the system. They were forced to confess to crimes they didn't do on the basis that, in the hope that they wouldn't be sent to prison. And so looking at this whole sort of side, there are many, many questions to be asked about that sort of stuff. It's unpacking as on a daily basis, virtually.
And let's look, because we don't have a lot of time left. Express, pages 4 and 5. MPs, let's make Fujitsu pay up. Obviously, Fujitsu, the company that ran the whole Horizon IT. So what do you make of this particular angle of actually putting the blame on Fujitsu as well?
Well, it seems that Fujitsu has not yet had... it's been ridiculous. It's been a fairly minor player in this whole story. And in fact, I think in the last few days, 2 people employed by Fujitsu have become more prominent and are possibly under investigation. They have contributed to the inquiry. But it seems absolutely obvious that Fujitsu knew about problems in the system. And we've all heard so many times that every single postmaster who called the help desk was told they were the only ones who'd raised the issue, when that was a lie. So who authorised them to lie? And it looks as if this was a cover-up on every front, but it starts with Fujitsu. So absolutely, they haven't yet paid anything. So they absolutely should be paying up.
Very briefly, Andrew.
Yeah, and I think I was saying earlier, I was with Michael Rodkin, who's the guy who was shown round Fujitsu and shown how they could basically go into individual systems and alter the figures. All of that's going to be unpacked, and the sooner that happens, the better.
I have a feeling we'll be talking about the story for many months to come. Christina, Andrew, stay with us. We'll have more from the papers, including this in the Sunday Express. Their headline, Cameron's peace call as Taiwan's voters rebuff reunion with China. You're watching the press preview, where I'm joined by barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn and journalist and author Christina Patterson. Thanks for still being with us now. Express page 2. Cameron peace call as Taiwan's voters rebuff reunion with China. So obviously there was an election in Taiwan on Saturday, which the party which wants autonomy from China won again. So
unprecedented third term.
Absolutely. Christina, what do you make of this?
Well, I think obviously Lord Cameron has said, essentially called for peace because China has been making very aggressive noises about Taiwan for a long time. But I think one of the things that's interesting about the situation with Taiwan is that it shows realpolitik, because we are not calling for democracy and freedom for Taiwan. I mean, we're not calling for independence for Taiwan. We're just saying we don't want Taiwan to be swallowed up by or invaded by China. But because we have to keep China sweet, we have to have this very sort of nuanced, rather uncomfortable middle position. And so many of these geopolitical crises are actually about complex alliances. And it's not about being kind of pure-minded and thinking we're doing what's right here. If we did what was right, we would say, yes, of course, Taiwan should be granted independence. But that's not going to happen.
Exactly. And Beijing have pledged they're not going to give up on reunification. And they're watching what happens with Ukraine and Russia and so on and so forth. And that's the difficulty, because it's another area where there's going to be this massive conflict.
Well, let's hope not, but yes, potentially. Let's go now to the Sunday Express, page 5. It's got a very interesting story that I know really caught your eye. 60 years of small-screen dramas with a big impact. Because, of course, I mean, we can have a long discussion. There was a lot of journalism done about the post office scandal, which then provided the foundations for the drama. But certainly it's the drama that captured the public's imagination and then all the political action. And what the Express does, it looks at a lot of other TV dramas that made changes. So
absolutely, going all the way back to 1966 with Kathy Comes Home, which put homelessness on the political agenda and established Ken Roach as one of the most powerful filmmakers. We also had Threads from 1984, which had basically confronting viewers with the horrors that could await if politicians failed to prevent a nuclear conflict. who bombed Birmingham, they talked about in 1990, for the 1974 Birmingham pub bombings, again talking about the convictions which were quashed. And obviously It's a Sin, which about the AIDS epidemic. Interestingly, for It's a Sin, Sean Dooley, who played Michael Rudkin, he was in It's a Sin as well. So the power of television, the power of storytelling, the power of the media to get these outrages put in the public eye is sort of second to none. I think it's very interesting that it sort of expresses, sort of drawn our attention to that as well.
I guess drama can bring out the human angle in a way that very little journalism can in the same way.
Well, I think... I mean, I would hate to say that journalism doesn't bring out the human angle, because I think it does. But I think that TV drama does, well, clearly in this particular situation and in some of these others, has had an enormous galvanising and inspiring effect, because nothing brings people alive like drama. But I do think that, given budget cuts to the BBC and many of the broadcasters and what's happening with the streaming giants, I do think this kind of commissioned homegrown drama is under threat. And I think that would be a real shame. Obviously, something like Succession had enormous global reach and was absolutely superb. I mean, pretty much a masterpiece of television. But things that portray life in Britain in its complexities and British society and the challenges it faces, I do think that is under threat from the budget cuts that, in particular, the BBC faces, obviously other broadcasters as well. And I do think that's what was so wonderful about the ITV drama, that it cut through that, and a very high proportion of the nation actually sat and watched it.
Yeah, and then galvanised public interest.
Yes, absolutely.
OK, let's take a look at the Telegraph. So, Rwanda bill, this is on the front page. Rwanda bill must be strengthened or we will kill it off. Tory Spartans warn Sunak. Andrew, help me, because sometimes I forget about the various factions within the Conservative Party. So which ones were they?
Well, the reality is this. It's one of Rishi Sunak's big 5 pledges to stop the boats, and the Rwanda pull-out. It's like a nasty word all the time. It's been failing on that basis. They lost the Supreme Court side. They're trying to make sure that they can't get the lawyers wriggling, so they work on that sort of basis. But just because you call it... It's Abraham Lincoln always used to say that if you count the tail of a dog as a leg, how many legs does a dog have? Well, the answer is still 4, because just because you call the tail a leg doesn't make it so. So calling Rwanda a safe country doesn't necessarily make it so. And so they're looking at all the sort of wriggle room and so on and so forth. The bill's going to come up for more debates. They're saying you've got to toughen it up so that the lawyers can't get that wriggle room. But that's the problem.
It shows it's still creating these huge splits within the Conservatives.
Well, I think that's one of the things that emerges from this story, that you've got the so-called common sense group, who in their right minds calls themselves the Common Sense Group. And then you've got Mark Francois, the ERG, who enjoyed for years strutting around and demanding the hardest Brexit possible, and who loves being thought of as a Spartan, because nobody looking at him would think this man is a Spartan, whatever that might be. And I mean, it's like, you know, you've got People's Republic of God knows what. They're just, it looks very sixth form college, actually, is how it looks to me, deeply amateur. The Tories are a split party, and that's one of the many reasons that they are 20 points behind in the polls, and that they are extremely likely to lose the next election.
But the whole point was not to send people to Rwanda. The whole point was to stop people in the things. It's the criminal gangs which need to be targeted.
Or just in general having a deterrent.
Exactly, it's a deterrent.
We'll see.
Should be a deterrent.
Should be a deterrent. Christina, Patterson, Andrew Eborn, as always, it's been great having you on. Thank you.